Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into something that's really sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it all kind of revolves around this idea of trade tariffs and how much we should be willing to bear, sort of endure as a nation.
Hmm.
So the jumping off point for this deep dive is a Fox News segment that we came across where one of the hosts suggested that Americans should just suck it up
Yeah.
when it comes to potential hardships from President Trump's trade tariffs. And then we've got this great counterpoint from a Ring of Fire YouTube video
Right.
that really tears into this whole notion.
Yeah.
So let's just dig right in. So this Fox News segment, Outnumbered.
Outnumbered, yep.
The host, Harris Faulkner, she was talking about the potential for market instability, obviously tied to, the whole tariff situation.
Right.
And she made this comparison to wartime sacrifices, saying like we all need to just sort of buckle down and get through this bumpy period.
Yeah. 100% buy-in was
Yeah.
Was the phrase that she used, I believe.
100% buy-in.
Yeah. And she kind of suggested that shareholders should anticipate what's coming. So,
Mhm.
kind of like a batten down the hatches kind of a thing.
Yeah, brace yourselves.
Yeah.
Well, the Ring of Fire folks, they did not like that analogy at all.
They did not like that one bit.
They came back swinging hard with this argument that tariffs are not, some abstract concept. They're a tax on the American people,
Right.
quote unquote, because it's the everyday person, our listeners out there who are going to feel this in their wallets.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the ways they see this impacting just, the average person's finances?
Well, they focus a lot on the fact that tariffs increase the cost of imported goods,
Right.
which means higher prices for consumers on a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
Electronics, clothing, you name it.
Yeah.
They basically argue that this acts as a tax
Yeah.
directly on American households.
It's interesting because, in that Fox News segment, they really leaned into that wartime sacrifice analogy, talking about how people contributed to the war effort, scrap metal drives, rationing, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The YouTube commentary really pushed back against that comparison.
Oh, yeah, big time.
What was their main point of contention there?
Well, they argued that wartime sacrifices were made to combat a clear threat.
Right.
Like tyranny, for example.
Fascism.
Fascism, yeah.
Yeah.
And they question the justification for comparable hardship now because the stated reasons for this trade war are way less clearly defined.
Yeah.
And the objectives seem to shift.
Yeah, which actually brings up a good point because the Ring of Fire commentary, they really seem to be struggling with the whole rationale behind these tariffs. Do they ever really nail down like a clear goal or an endpoint to this trade war?
Not really. They highlight the lack of, transparent and consistent objectives, and more importantly, the absence of defined metrics for success or even resolution.
Yeah.
Which, fuels concerns about this prolonged hardship with no clear benefit in sight.
Right. So it's like, okay, we're all tightening our belts, but to what end?
Exactly.
And it comes across so strongly in the Ring of Fire commentary just how much they're worried about the impact on everyday people.
Yeah, really concerned.
What were some of the more, visceral concerns that they expressed?
Well, they talked about families having to cut back on essential spending, potentially facing food insecurity,
Wow.
even the risk of losing their homes.
Yeah.
They paint a really stark picture of economic strain on ordinary Americans.
And they also touched on, this whole idea of who's being asked to make these sacrifices, right? What is their perspective on that?
Well, they suggest that the people advocating for Americans to just suck it up, they might not be the ones facing the same level of financial vulnerability as a lot of working families,
Right.
who could be directly hit by rising prices and economic instability.
So essentially they're saying there's this disconnect between the people calling for sacrifice and the people who will actually be feeling the pain.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, on one hand, you have this idea that we should all be willing to endure some level of hardship for, the greater good, the national interests.
Yeah, the collective.
And on the other hand, you have this very real potential for significant personal financial strain, for folks who are already struggling to make ends meet.
And the question is the trade-off worth it?
Right. And it really gets you thinking about historical precedents for national sacrifice, right? There have been times when we've asked Americans to, ration, to conserve, to, contribute to the war effort in very real ways.
Right.
But in those cases, the reasons were generally pretty well understood and widely accepted.
Yeah, as a matter of national survival.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So considering that history, What questions does this comparison raise for you about the underlying purpose and ultimate consequences of these trade policies, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes you think about, is this situation really comparable to those past examples of national sacrifice?
Yeah.
And if not, you know, what does that say about the justification for asking people to bear these potential costs?
Yeah. Are we all being asked to sacrifice for something that we don't even fully understand or agree on?
It's a really important question.
It is, and it's one that I think our listeners should be grappling with, so I hope this deep dive has given you all some food for thought.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that we need to keep having.
Absolutely.
For sure.
All right, well, thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you later.